everyone. My name is John Hanson, and with Jacob Lipton, I co-direct the Systemic Justice Project at Harvard Law School. It's our pleasure to welcome you all to the fifth installment of our webinar series, Systemic Lawyering in Times of Crisis. Now let me hand it over to Jacob, who can introduce our panelists and describe how we'll proceed today.
Thanks, John. We're thrilled today to have three amazing lawyers on our panel. Our first, Lam Ho, who is the founder and executive director of Beyond Legal Aid, which has a community activism lawyering model that they have developed, which unites lawyers and activists to help underserved communities access justice and pursue social change. They create community activism law programs for, by, with, and within their partner communities, and do work with communities affected by immigration, housing, family, policing, and many more areas. And as well as doing the work and thinking about the work, Lam is incredibly thoughtful about theorizing Beyond Legal Aid's community activism lawyering model, and constantly working to refine it and ensure it lives up to the vision, and sharing it with as many people as he can, and has generously done many times with us and our students. Becky Wolozin is a attorney at the Immigrant Advocacy program at the Legal Aid Justice Center, where she's worked since 2015, first as an Equal Justice Works Fellow with the Just Children program, and now as an attorney in the Immigrant Advocacy program. She also directs George Mason Law School's Immigration Litigation Clinic, and is a former student in the Systemic Justice course, and has a background as well as in law in education. She did a master's in education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, focusing on education law and child development. And we're thrilled to have Becky back virtually with us. And Phil Torrey is the managing attorney of the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinical Program, and the director of the Crimmigration Clinic, and a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School. He also teaches a course on the intersection of criminal law and immigration law. Through the Crimmigration Clinic, he engages in cutting-edge litigation and policy advocacy concerning issues ranging from criminal bars to immigration relief to sanctuary city policies, and advises criminal defense attorneys around the country on the immigration consequences of criminal charges. Phil is incredibly committed to enabling students to do vital cutting-edge justice work in a whole range of contexts inside and outside the clinic, and we're thrilled to have him join us today. The sixth box you see on the screen is Molly Coleman, who is not on the panel, but will be speaking later, including making a pitch about ways that students can get involved through the People's Parity Project, and helping out in this work. So thank you, Molly. And with those introductions, I'm going to start by asking a simple question that we were discussing a bit before this started, which is where you are right now, and how you're doing, and maybe some kind of media that you're engaging with at the moment, TV shows or movies or a book or anything else that you're doing to keep you sane. So I'll start with Becky.
Okay, hi, I'm Becky. I am currently at my in-laws' house, where there is more room for my very small children to run around and make a mess, and go outside. So media that I'm engaging with, I would say, is mostly PBS Kids at this point. But I guess I'm also on Facebook and other social media, and actually my organization does a Facebook Live broadcast every day in English and Spanish about issues related to COVID that affect our various communities we work with. So I'm doing that. I try and do yoga to remember that I'm a human being, and I have, I'm a regular person. I'm not just this cooking, cleaning, sometimes working machine.
Thanks, Becky. Phil?
Oh, thanks, and thanks so much for having me. It's great to see all of you guys. I'm currently in Arlington, Massachusetts, where I live. I thought about putting up like a fancy background here, but then I thought this is sort of more authentic to my current life. So this is my basement, and this is where my two kids, so I have two young kids as well, like Becky, where my kids and also our two cats like to hang out in the tent here. And then in terms of media or different sort of avenues for trying to keep myself sane, I have a running Friday night cards with my friends that we now do via Zoom, and it's actually worked out pretty well. So that's kind of what has kept me going, in addition to like Becky spending time with my kids.
Yeah, so I've been on the strangest sort of annual birthday vacations ever. So I always take a week off around my birthday, and which was last week. And for the first time, I did not leave the house except for once to go pick up a cake. Otherwise, that was my entire birthday week vacation. It did allow me to watch what everyone else has told me I needed to watch, which was The Tiger King. I think that's called. Yeah, Tiger King on Netflix. And, you know, that definitely sort of affirms that truth is often stranger than fiction, because if you haven't seen it, I can't believe that this is actually, this documentary is our country. And then also, luckily, I caught up. I rewatched, I think, 3 seasons of Designing Women, which was one of my favorite shows growing up, and it's now on Hulu. So that's what I did over the past week.
Great. So now I'd like to expand the timeline a little bit and ask, what were you doing? How would you describe your work before COVID-19 crisis, and how has that changed in the past month or so? And we'll go in the same order for now. So Becky.
Way prior to COVID, I was working, and I continue to work on advocating for detained children in particular, and had been working up until a summary judgment hearing in November on a large class action case on behalf of unaccompanied minors detained by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, to sort of address the Kafka-esque situation that they have in ever getting released and to whom they can get released. And then also to challenge the sort of combination of the Refugee Resettlement Office with law enforcement. So basically they were collecting a lot of fingerprints about these children's family members and community, and then sending them to ICE to assist in law enforcement. So I was working on that. And then I also direct the George Mason Immigration Litigation Clinic, which is new this year. And so I'm spending a lot of time developing that clinic and working up cases with those students to do basic humanitarian removal defense type cases. So I would just say our current organization, and whether that's me specifically, has also been a major change for me, and that I'm usually somebody to jump in, step up, and put in long hours. And with kids at home, you just can't do that. And so, or I just can't do that. Some people are doing it. I don't know how. But so I will say personally, for me, that's just been a real life lesson in like sitting back and letting others step up. And I think that's kind of been valuable for me as well. But the organization, my organization is doing a lot of work similar to what everyone's discussed. We are continuing with a lot of advocacy on detained cases. And I see someone ask, what is an emergency in immigration court right now? And so all detained cases are going forward. Non-detained cases, so people who are out in the community, have been continued for the most part. And so my organization this past week got 2 or 3 people out of detention just through emergency bond hearings, which are done telephonically. So people aren't going into court luckily for us, the telephonic motions are being approved. And we've also filed several habeas petitions, like Phil mentioned, getting people out. And then we also have a class action lawsuit filed together with a few other advocacy organizations. I don't remember which ones right now, on behalf of detained immigrants in Virginia to get them out. And then Legal Aid Justice Center, my organization, has this litigation side, but it also does a lot of community lawyering and community organizing. And then it also has a policy advocacy side. So on the policy side, we've been advocating with the state of Virginia to go and inspect the detention facilities to determine whether they have any plans for COVID, and if they're not up to code, basically, to have them shut down until they come into compliance, which we're hoping will force them to either like provide hand sanitizer or let everyone out. And then we've also been on the, that's sort of the biggest thing that I can think of right now on the policy side. But on the community organizing side, we actually run food distributions in our community for our client communities. And so many of our organizers are actually still going to do those food distributions. They're, you know, having people stand 6 feet apart and pre-bagging food and stuff so that it can happen as safely as possible. They're spending time with the day laborers who are, some are still out there trying to work. And then we have multiple meetings a week to try and talk about what are the immediate urgent needs of our clients who are not able to earn money. They're worried they're going to get sick. They don't have health insurance. They're largely undocumented immigrants, and so they don't benefit from any of the federal stimulus package assistance. And so there's a lot of sort of triage of what are the most immediate needs of the people that we work with and how can we best serve them. We don't give money out as an organization, but we try and compile lists of resources that do give money out. We're looking at what potential solutions there are for rent assistance. There's a lot of food assistance, but you know, getting people to the right places takes some coordination. And then, like I mentioned, we're doing these daily Facebook Live updates in English and in Spanish to try and address any potential topic. Legal Aid Justice Center doesn't just work with immigrants, so the topics range across like anything for low income people, basically.
Thanks, Becky. Phil?
Thanks. Yeah, before this whole pandemic hit, I was working primarily in the Crimmigration clinic in the Harvard Immigration Refugee Clinical Program, and my days would usually consist of several meetings with students, you know, phone calls with co-counsel on cases or opposing counsel, talking to my clients. All of my clients are detained around the country in different locations, and they're all facing deportation because of a prior criminal record. And the buckets of work that we had going on included litigation, included some direct representation at the trial court level, in addition to some policy advocacy, you know, white papers and research and things like that. When the pandemic really hit and we all started working remotely, my work kind of shifted in two distinct ways. One practical and one more substantive. So the practical shift obviously included working remotely, talking to my students via Zoom, like we're doing right now. And then my wife is a full-time attorney as well, so we're trying to sort of juggle both the two full-time careers and also watching two children at home. So we basically split our days. I work Tuesday mornings, and she works Tuesday afternoons, and otherwise I work every afternoon. And then after we put the kids to bed, we go back to work. And so most of my days now entail phone calls and meetings and less sort of working on substantive litigation and other projects. That's shifted to the evening hours. And then substantively, the other big change has been litigation around COVID-19. So I have a couple of emergency habeas petitions that are now pending in the district court to get specifically 2 of my clients out of detention. Both of them are at Franklin County House of Correction, which is in Greenfield, Massachusetts. They have a emergency hearing in front of a district court judge on Thursday morning for one of those cases. And then also working on 2 different pieces of class action litigation involving a couple different detention centers. So a lot of the work that I had substantively prior to COVID-19, which obviously did not involve this virus at all, I feel like most of my time is now been poured into projects that are specifically affected by this virus, and other projects have had to kind of take a back seat.
So I'll try to present both perspectives, both for my organization and for my own personal work. As executive director over the past, particularly the last 6 months, I haven't taken on additional cases, and my caseload is quite reduced. So my personal schedule has generally been just a lot of meetings, because as executive director, I spend most of my time doing things like managing sort of public speaking engagements, lots and lots of networking and fundraising. So most of my days are going to be filled with meetings. And then I think I have about 7 cases. And so I would do some casework. I would occasionally go into court, but that I generally don't have the typical lawyer work schedule anymore. Since the pandemic really hit and we went completely remotely, basically most of my meetings, I now just have lots and lots of meetings, but via video conference instead of one-on-one. It has affected quite a bit some of the fundraising opportunities that I otherwise would be engaged in. And instead, I've now shifted more of my time towards meetings with staff and meetings with our community partners, as opposed to funders and sort of networking opportunities. And obviously, a lot of the speaking engagements I no longer were canceled, so that hasn't happened. There hasn't been as much a shift of moving conferences or symposiums or convenings online as compared to other activities. In terms of the organization, as Jacob mentioned, we operate entirely with community partners. So each of our programs have been affected differently. Some of our partners, particularly the smaller, really grassroots organizations that either are not even fully incorporated or have really limited staff, have actually decided to just shut down the clinic and basically only operate on an emergency basis. So instead of sort of doing intakes and being open for people to come in and meet with attorneys in one way or another, they've just simply closed them down and said, if you have an emergency, you can contact either the clinic coordinator, who is a community partner person, so someone in the community who would oversee those emergency calls, or contact the attorney that you're already working with. So I think I would say that's about half of our program. So we have 20 programs, of which 7 are what we call community law offices, which have a physical location that someone can go to. So I would say overall, half of our total 20 programs are not operating anymore and are only handling emergencies. So no new cases and no new meetings with community members. Community members in our organization is what we call clients, because we sort of reject some of the hierarchical power-based associations with the term client and attorney. So half of those programs are not doing intakes with new community members, and the other half are shifting remotely. So I think 3 of the 7 law offices are still open for people to come in and seek assistance. It's just, well, actually, 2 of the 7 have shifted entirely remotely. One of them is actually still open for physical meetings, and we're sort of negotiating with our community partner on how to coordinate that. It's actually in a different county. It's about an hour from Chicago, in a different county, and their approach has been to maintain social distancing. And because they also operate a food pantry, they're open as an essential business. And the legal clinic, their BIA accredited reps are still conducting meetings in person, and we're trying to negotiate with them whether or not our attorneys will be coming in to do the meetings for the legal clinic that we operate together in person or remotely as well. In terms of the work, we are doing some of the same work that Phil mentioned in terms of some of the more urgent cases, and we actually, it was about a week and a half ago, we're able to get one of our community members released from detention as a result of COVID-19. So more sort of impact litigation level work, since most of the cases, like most of the housing cases, family cases, immigration court cases are not moving forward except for on emergency basis. So that sort of impacts automatically our work. We also have been doing a lot of work with the organizations themselves. So as a result of not being able to do a lot of the direct services, a lot of our community partners have really taken the time to focus on activism campaigns, organizing campaigns. So some of the examples that we've been working on are obviously detention center and prison COVID impact case campaigns and immigration detention, but also things like we have with one of our community partners a factory that moved forward with demolition, and that, as you can imagine, caused a lot of environmental health safety issues as a result of the dust being the dust and debris that's resulting and released into the atmosphere for this community. And then the last, I think, big campaign we're focusing on is the rent suspension. So that is basically a bigger chunk of our work has shifted to bigger organizational campaigns that we can provide legal support for.
I think we're going to want to drill down on a lot of the things that each of you said, because part of the question we bring to these webinars is how we and students can help in your various projects, and you all have a lot of them. I was wondering if any of you had a story, a moment or an interaction that you've had over the last several weeks that you have found particularly revealing about the nature of the interaction of your work with the pandemic, or particularly haunting or hopeful. I'm not expecting any stories, but if any one of you has one you'd like to share, we'd love to hear that as well.
I had a really sort of silly one, but it was kind of cool. And I think it sort of shows that, like, I'm sort of the cockeyed optimist, but this is sort of like a silver lining of the pandemic. So I was doing a Facebook Live video, I think, on USCIS application. So what's going to happen if you applied for a work permit, depending on where you were in the process and all of that. And I saw a former client of mine during the English one, which was also surprising to me, but a former client of mine where we had filed, I filed maybe the second impact case that I worked on ever, filed on behalf of her and her family. And I saw like a little hand pop up with like a, "Hi, Becky." And it was just this kind of amusing thing where I think that so much of our work now is sort of what feels like speaking into a void, because you don't know who's there, who's hearing you, who are you reaching, is it helping? And that was just really sort of fun and reassuring for me. To say, to see like she's paying attention, she's, going to us for help, but also it was really cool to reconnect with her. I think on the sad side has just been all of people are terrified, and our organizers are hearing it every day. And then we talk about it in meetings, and, people are not paying rent, and there's waiting. Once someone gets sick, like, it's gonna be a big problem. So that's really hard, and you can sort of hear the pain in the voices of our organizers that recount these stories to us. And that is a hard reminder that this is really, 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 really bad for a lot of people.
Thanks.
Sorry to end on the sad note. Should have
No,
switched
it's all good.
I can present a happy story. It's a bit of a stretch, but I mentioned that we actually just about a week and a half ago had success having one of our community members who'd been in detention for I think 10 months at this point released as a result of COVID-19, and it was really through the pressure of our community organizers who were calling and bombarding ICE and the detention center facilities to inform them of the medical conditions that our community member was experiencing, and also the medical situation for his family as well. And that led to them, led to a call. I think it was a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday afternoon when his partner received a call from the detention center saying, "Come pick him up." And it was a really amazing moment and the reason I actually bring this case was it was more of a reminder of, in the chaos that's going on, a reminder to us at our organization of how important our communities are in terms of doing the work. As Jacob mentioned, like everything that we do is fully in partnership with our community organizations or community groups. So none of our programs, all the decisions are made by them. But one of the things that's really important about this case is that under our model, even litigation decisions are made by our community partners, because it's really important that the litigation is informed and directed by the organizing goals. And so this case it's a cancellation of removal case for a community member who, as I mentioned, had been in detention for several months and involved DUI. So anyone who's practices immigration knows that over the past year, DUI has been a major complicated bane in immigration practice because of recent decisions, particularly under Jeff Sessions. So we had this case where the community member had been denied bond. I can't recall if it was once or twice already. And because of the DUI convictions that he had on his record, he was not going to get bond. But our community the community partners, a group of activists, and the Organized Communities Against Deportation, basically told us that they wanted to seek a bond redetermination hearing again. And the reason they wanted to do it was because of the goals that they had for highlighting what was going on with immigration and immigration detention. So our attorneys sort of recommended that we don't pursue it because we were concerned that to bring up the issue yet again, even after the denial, and soon after, we're going to have a hearing on the cancellation of removal, and we didn't want to piss off the judge. So not only in terms of the legal merits of the case, but also strategically, we didn't want to pursue what I think may have been the third bond redetermination hearing on an issue that we weren't going to win, potentially affecting the judge's decision in terms of the ruling on the cancellation of removal case, which was already going to be a difficult case due to the DUI change in law. But because our community partner insisted and said this was something that they wanted to pursue, it was really important to their organizing strategies. We deferred to the decision and proceeded to have the seek a bond redetermination and then have a hearing. It was an extraordinarily strange experience. So the judge was initially, as we expected, actually really pissed off that we were trying to do it. So by the time we actually had the hearing, he actually had extra security in the courtroom. They stood in front of the courtroom and basically prevented our community organizers from entering the courtroom. One of the big strategies that our community organizers uses is packing the courtroom to show the community support in bond hearings generally, to say, if this person's bond to the community's here to protect them, to support them. And so the judge actually blocked people from entering, because usually they had the courtroom would be filled with all of our organizers and all the people they brought. And we knew something was going on because we'd never seen this before, where security was basically saying you can't come in, and they had security people actually sit down and take some of the spots. So we had people who had to wait outside the courtroom. So it was a really surreal experience, and as expected, the bond was denied, and so our community partner was continued to stay in detention. But what was really amazing is that about a month later, we had the cancellation of removal hearing, and despite the DUI conviction, which would have, under Jeff Sessions' decision, impacted our community member, the judge actually specifically referenced how his decision was based upon the pain and suffering that he witnessed as a result of the bond hearing, and the community support that was exhibited through the entire process. So it was a really important learning moment, more than anything else, for us as attorneys, how we were so focused on what we thought we knew, what we thought our legal experience had for us. And if we had not deferred to our community member, we wouldn't have gotten this cancellation of removal decision that really was an act of judicial activism. The judge was pretty open about it. And of course, the reason our community member, despite winning the cancellation of removal, was still in detention was because the government appealed. And so we're working on the appeal now. But the moment was really a powerful moment for the attorneys working on the case and everyone in our organization on just why it's so important that we work with our community partners and really let them lead, even in things that are traditionally considered attorney decisions, like what should we do in terms of litigation strategy.
Thanks, Lam. That is an inspiring story and example of the model at work and functioning. I wonder if I could ask about roles for law students, and there are so many law students who want to get involved in supporting the kind of work that you do and other work. I wonder if you could speak about the kind of pressing needs that you see and any roles that the students can play in this kind of work.
I could jump in here a little bit, and I had a short sort of anecdote to kind of respond to what Professor Hansen had asked about, what we're kind of seeing. I was on a phone call last night with an assistant U.S. attorney about one of our cases, who's obviously opposing counsel in this particular case. And for probably the first 15 to 20 minutes of the phone call, we talked about nothing related to the case and just about our own families, our work environment, our kids, how we were feeling, what working at home looked like. And it was a really sort of interesting, humanizing moment, because I feel like most of my conversations with opposing counsel are pretty to the point, very business professional kind of focused. And that's not the first kind of conversation I've had in the last couple of weeks with either courthouse personnel, with security guards at facilities, opposing counsel, and that sort of thing. So I was trying to think of a good, sort of a more kind of uplifting, happier note, because most of my work related to this is very less uplifting, I'll say. In terms of your question about students getting involved in the work that there is for opportunities for students, in my clinic, and I know this is very common for a lot of clinics, I'm sure Becky's is similar, students really take the lead in terms of doing the work itself. So at our hearing this coming Thursday morning, two of my students, Sarah and Michael, will be arguing that case in front of the judge and quite possibly have an opportunity to cross-examine the sheriff of Franklin County, which is in itself pretty cool. But also have an opportunity to really get some of the first information out of the sheriff's office, specifically related to their detention facility, as to what kind of mitigation measures they're taking related to COVID-19 and ensuring the safety of individuals there. So the students have worked really hard in terms of preparing for that hearing, but also preparing the petitions and pieces of litigation that we're working on and advancing and thinking about what kinds of arguments there are to bring. It's a novel issue, and novel issues aren't uncommon in immigration. I'm sure all of us can talk about that a little bit. The COVID-19 related arguments, I saw Drew had a question about what some of those substantive arguments look like. What we've seen, there's a couple of different kinds of claims, and it depends a little bit on the situation your specific client is in. And there's a couple of different strategies in terms of whether to go forward on an individual habeas case versus class action. And I can talk more about that later to give other folks time to talk. But the kinds of claims that we're bringing are largely based on Fifth Amendment due process rights, really via the Eighth Amendment. So immigration detention is civil confinement. It's not supposed to be punishment in any way, shape, or form, although in reality it actually is. And the Eighth Amendment is a pretty strong constitutional right in preventing cruel and unusual punishment. If you use the Eighth Amendment as sort of a lens through which to view the Fifth Amendment, which is supposed to be protection for folks in civil confinement, you can develop a claim that says the Fifth Amendment necessarily requires facilities to provide space in which an individual's health and well-being is protected, and to ensure that you're not putting them in more harm's way. So most of our claims have been based on the Fifth Amendment. There's also something called the Rehabilitation Act, which is you can create statutory claims based on that, civil rights claims. Those kinds of actions I've seen more for cases in which an individual has some kind of pre-existing condition that would aggravate COVID-19 infection or expose them to a higher risk of contracting the infection. The clients that I'm working with, I don't have anyone at the moment that has one of those kinds of conditions. So we haven't brought those kinds of claims. But that kind of claim versus kinds of claims that we've been bringing, and also looking at detention center conditions, at least what I'm seeing and sort of talking to folks about, is often one of the driving forces in an individual habeas versus a civil rights claim. But I've gone on sort of beyond your question, Jacob, and I would just say that in the clinic, students are doing this exact kind of work. And there's also opportunities outside of that in terms of like advocacy, in terms of letter writing and doing research for, there's a new bill that Representative Jayapala and Senator Booker put forward, advocating around that. So there's a host of opportunities for that.
Thanks, Phil. Becky, I know you have to jump off in a second, so I want to give you a chance to speak to this if you want to before you have to go.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what can students right now do with whatever they have, and I think from a non-immigration, legal perspective, but from an immigrant's rights and needs perspective, the types of jobs that immigrants are doing right now, the types of jobs undocumented immigrants have, and the lack of legal protections for them means that they're at more risk of getting COVID, and they're also at much higher risk of just losing their job, no unemployment, no safety net at all in any way, no health insurance, and a lot of confusion and fears about even going to the doctor as it relates to public charge and other sorts of issues. And so what I've seen and what I think as smart and passionate activist students can work on wherever they're from, even if it's not in Boston, is looking for local organizations that are raising funds for undocumented immigrants, and working on either fundraising for them or reaching out to them and seeing if they need help coordinating or whatever. If you have language skills and you can offer sort of translation or interpretation services to immigrant organizations, I think those are things you can do without any extra sort of legal training at this very moment, that are so needed. Those funds are all super local because obviously federal government doesn't want anything to do with it, and then state governments may be able to offer some funding, but it's difficult if they get any funding through the federal government, then none of that can be diverted to undocumented immigrants. And I will note even mixed status families. So the check that people are getting, if you live in a mixed status family, if you file taxes with anybody who doesn't have a social security number, nobody in the family gets that money. And so it's really kind of cruel designation that is particularly hurting immigrant families. And so to the extent that you can put your energy towards alternative ways to help undocumented immigrants or underdocumented immigrant communities, I think that is hugely important right now. And I will say, I have to jump off, but Jacob can give you all my contact information, or you can find it on our website, justice4all.org. And I am more than happy to chat with anybody, and I encourage you to check out our website for all the stuff that we're doing related to COVID specifically, and then unrelated to COVID if you're interested. I will say we host summer interns, so we have our interns for this summer, but if you're interested in doing this type of work and you want the confluence of community, lawyering, and impact litigation all in one little organization, then feel free to reach out to me. And I'm so glad you guys are taking this course and you get this wonderful experience with these wonderful people. So I got a little extension on my morning time, but I'm about to split my day, like Phil was talking about. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you,
Thanks
Becky.
so much for joining. I'll jump in and ask another question, though if you want to add anything on that question as well, you can too, which is about how you think about the balance between working with individual clients who have even in more in kind of vaster needs than they did before the COVID crisis, and responding to that urgent suffering, and thinking about crises like this as a moment for challenging systemic causes and thinking long term about how our systems could be operating differently post crisis. So how do you think about that balance?
So I don't want to be flippant about my response, but it's actually pretty easy for us because we don't actually make the decision. So the way our model works is we say to our community partner, if you had a team of lawyers, what would you want? So that hasn't changed under the pandemic. So when under normal operations, our community partners will decide, we want you to do these individual cases, or we want you to focus the capacity on this campaign that we're running. And that hasn't changed under the current circumstances. So it remains up to whether it be a large community-based organization or a small group of activists to decide whether or not we're going to take on this individual case, or they want us to work on some sort of campaign. So in many sense, that balance is something that we don't directly have to negotiate. I will say the experience we've had so far is most of our community partners have taken the approach of generally we're going to use this time when most courts are not open and most of the cases are not proceeding to focus on the organizational work we want to do, a lot of campaign work and a lot of building up for when things resume. I mentioned the rent suspension and abatement campaign that some of our community partners are working on, but they're also working on preparing Know Your Rights for that they haven't had the opportunity to do before around the eviction process that they'll be using once the COVID-19 situation improves. So that's what their general focus has been. And then emergency individual situations. So what I think the individual cases that we've been directed to take on are the ones that the community partner has decided this is an urgent individual situation that we want you to prioritize. I think that I would say that probably is it's a generalization, but it is pretty much across the board with all of our community partners.
And I could just add sort of a little bit in terms of thinking systemically about some of the litigation that we're working on. So a lot of the work that we do focuses on detention and really incarceration in the immigration context. And we try to take sort of an abolitionist viewpoint in challenging just the premise that immigration detention is something that should be used in the first place. And there's a couple of different ways in which we do that, and using certain kind of language and highlighting certain kinds of articles and things like that. In this particular context, I think if there's an opportunity to further educate district court judges who are the ones that are looking at these kinds of habeas petitions and class actions about what immigration confinement or immigration incarceration actually looks like. They're getting an opportunity to see what detention facilities entail, or the procedures and policies there, the lack of safety there, the fact that we have this sort of legal fiction that it's civil confinement, when in fact, in reality, there's nothing civil really about it. So it's an opportunity to sort of educate an important member of the legal community as to, in reality, what's happening at these facilities. So I'll just add that.
That's great. Thank you both very much. In a moment, I think we'll hear from Molly, but given that so many of our attendees or the people who will watch this video will be law students, I'm wondering if you find yourselves giving slightly different advice at this moment to students thinking not necessarily about the summer, but about their careers or their vocational choices, or whether that's remained steady, independent of where we are. And if either of you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it.
So this is something that more than anything else, I think this moment has really reinforced something that I think that we at Beyond Legal Aid have always thought of. And that's the issue of what is lawyering, and what is the role of a lawyer. And I think more than anything else, what we're seeing, because we read about and hear about these debates. What if we can't take the bar exam? What if we can't be admitted to the bar? What if we can't go into courts? And a lot of what we've been thinking about and sort of challenging law students to think about is, what's the reason you want to be a lawyer? Because if you're going to be a lawyer because you want to pursue systemic change, for example, because you want to pursue justice, being in the courtroom is not the only option of doing so. So whatever your position is on how states should handle bar administration and bar admission, I think it really behooves anyone in law school to really challenge themselves to think about, what does it mean to have a law degree? And what is the practice of law, and what is it to be a lawyer? Because I think that being a lawyer doesn't mean you have to go into courts, you have to file lawsuits. There are a lot of other things that you can do to support communities that need quote unquote lawyers that don't have to be what you traditionally think of as the role of a lawyer. So I think that's been something that has really been reinforced as all these questions emerge around the role of lawyers in this situation and what's going to happen to bar admission.
Thanks, Phil.
It's hard to follow up on that. I couldn't possibly agree more. But I think that's exactly right. Yeah, and I'll say just sort of at an anecdotal level, my advice hasn't changed all that much. I think what Lam was just talking about is a really important point that I think is highlighted by what's going on now, but it's a conversation that hopefully has been going on and needs to happen more frequently. So yeah, I really appreciate those comments.
Thank you both. So I'm now going to turn over to Molly, who will talk a bit about some opportunities for law students to get involved in different ways, and also maybe mention a couple other upcoming projects as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jacob. Thanks, everybody on the panel. This was fascinating, as always. For those who I don't know, my name is Molly. I'm a 3M in the Systemic Justice course, and I'm also the National Organizing Director for the People's Parity Project, which is a national organization of law students who are working to unrig the law and to challenge the legal systems that lawyers have built that oppress workers and consumers and so many others in our society. So as those of you who have been on these webinars before have heard me talk about, we've been building out a network of law students who can help support the organizations like those we've heard discussed on today's webinar, who are really doing the on-the-ground work to respond to the legal needs created by the crisis. So we've been connecting law students with organizations like the Center for Popular Democracy and A Better Balance, Greater Boston Legal Services, tons of organizations around the country to provide research support, to help staff unemployment insurance hotlines, to create Know Your Rights materials. We are super excited about the work that we've done so far, but there is incredible need yet. So if you're interested in getting involved in this work, we'd love it if you went to peoplesparity.org/coronavirus. You can sign up there and we will get in touch about upcoming volunteer opportunities. The other thing that I wanted to highlight from this call, something that we haven't done, but just hearing Becky talk about the ways in which, finding local organizations that are raising funds for undocumented immigrants, trying to support with fundraising, reaching out to offer to help coordinate. This isn't something that PPP has done in the past, and I think it's clear that that's an incredible need, and I think it's something that law students could obviously be well positioned to support with, even if it's not a traditional legal skill that is needed. So if people are interested in working on that, feel free to reach out to me directly. I would love to think more about how we can support those efforts locally and more, and connecting different groups who are interested in it. And then the last thing that I wanted to flag is that we are working with Professor Hansen and Jacob at the Systemic Justice Project and the Justice Catalyst to think about how we can keep law students doing this work over the summer. The need is not going to dissipate anytime soon, and we also know that there are law students who had secured summer employment who are now facing the prospect of an unemployed summer given the crisis. So we'll be sharing more information after today's call about what that might look like, but if you are interested in learning more about ways to do this work over the summer, stay tuned for more information. We'll have an interest form going out later today. I think that is all from me.
Thank you so much, Molly. I know I asked, but I don't remember if either of you have a few more minutes. You can kind of hang on. If you can't, feel free to jump on. I see that Lam Canalese can. I wonder if I could ask about your greatest fear and greatest hope connected to your work at this moment, or maybe hope or special opportunities you see at this time.
So I can go first. My greatest fear and hopes are actually intertwined, and it has to do with the way that our country is sort of stratified. I'll start with my greatest hope. My greatest hope is that this moment really is a mobilizing moment for more people to recognize the inequities in our society and become galvanized to participate in seeking change to why there are so many people who don't have access to healthcare, who are not protected by unemployment services, who are so at risk despite all the resources in that certain other segments of our society have. My greatest fear is actually that as lawyers and as people who have certain privileges as a result of our profession, as a result of our education, as a result of our incomes, we sort of succumb to that. One of the things that does worry me is sort of organizationally, and I'm part of this. We think about like, how do we have all these resources to be able to say, you know, how do we ensure that we can pursue our work? How can we work remotely? And I spend my time thinking about the resources that are available so that we can effectively work remotely. And think about one of the things that I have a discussion later on is how do we sort of provide support morale resources to our employees, and I think that's absolutely necessary, and I think that's what I need to do as an executive director. That workforces need to think about that for their workers. But it does worry me that how much of that focus sort of ends up making us forget about the millions of people who aren't in jobs that have that. And I think I mentioned to you one of the discussion that we're negotiating with one of our community partners who have decided to remain open and want the legal clinic to remain open. And it's been a struggle for me to really think about, you know, our model is you make the decision. So if our community partner says we're sending our staff to meet with community members. Why can't you send your staff to meet with community members? Is there some sort of difference? And I worry about how much of that difference is because of the resources that we have. And is it legitimate to say, well, you know, as a legal agency, my general counsel is telling me that she has concerns around liability should one of our attorneys contract COVID as a result of us requiring them to go to our community partner's office to do in-person meetings. But and I have to balance that. But how much of that is from a perspective of somehow there is a hierarchy that it's okay for a BIA accredited rep working in the community to be at risk because they deem that their work to be essential, versus our attorney and our policy to protect our employees as much as possible. So I think it's something that I'm very much agonizing over because I think that from an organizational standpoint and from the standpoint of being an attorney, we sometimes forget how different the lived experiences of the people we work with are, and how do we remain sort of authentic and genuine to deferring to what their perspective is, if we're not willing to, if that comes in conflict with the perspective that we have at a very basic level that we often are unconscious around interrogating. So I think those two things are very tied up right now for me.
Thank you for that, and it doesn't surprise me at all that the answer revolves around existing and new inequalities that are coming in, kind of arising, and new categories like essential and non-essential, and not only kind of how those manifest in society, but how they directly affect the work that you're doing, and the direct implications, which I think it can sometimes be easy to think about one or the other, but to connect those two is rare and vital. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Lam in virtual person, and two now in absentia, Phil and Becky. This has been incredibly enlightening for me, and really appreciate all of you taking the time to do this. We will post this video soon online, and you can go to the Systemic Justice Project website to find information about upcoming webinars. We have, I think, at least 3 lined up, and we're hoping to keep going beyond that as well. So next week, Judge Nancy Gertner, District Attorney Rachel Rollins, and Carol Rose of the ACLU of Massachusetts. Thanks again. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday, Lam, and thank you for your amazing contribution today and all the work you do. And thank you, Molly, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care and stay safe, everyone.
You too.